Greetings to the All-African People's Revolutionary Party leadership and fellow panelists, and of course, brothers and sisters. Let me state the obvious and say that in Tanzania, we have gone through 3 stages of colonialism. They are classical colonialism, settler colonialism, and neo-colonialism. Tanzania is by no means different from our Africa in terms of this political experience. However, you could say that it is not that difficult to wage a struggle against both the classical and settler forms of colonialism because the enemy is distinct, visible, and isolated from the people. The problem arises with the anti-colonial struggle that is anchored on a narrow nationalism that makes no reference to the land repossession, total liberation, and socialism. If by any chance socialism is mentioned, it is only for the sole purposes of sloganeering. In Africa, it is the native bourgeoisie that usually leads those anti-colonial but bourgeois struggles. Frantz Fanon cautions us about the true political intentions of this national middle class, which, open quote, constantly demands the nationalization of the economy and of the trading sectors, close quote. This political elite does not have in mind the socialization of the means of wealth creation in a manner that the wealth so created would be equally distributed to the people, to eradicate poverty and develop both the country and the people. Says Fanon, open quote, to them, nationalization quite simply means the transfer into native hands of those unfair advantages which are a legacy of the colonial period, close quote. That is the reason why in South Africa, our Tanzania, we had billions of rand thrown into the so-called Zondo Commission to investigate corruption and state capture by the political elites hiding in the erstwhile liberation parties. When crime is committed by the ordinary people, the police investigate and simply arrest the culprits to face trial in a court of law. The process changes when the culprits are the ruling elites. Tedious parliamentary processes kick in and lead to the expensive establishment of some commissions of inquiry, which in turn must submit their findings to the very same ruling elites for the determination of action to be taken. Not much ever comes out of such processes. In Tanzania, classical colonialism metamorphosed into settler colonialism after the colonial powers slaughtered each other in that so-called Anglo-Boer War and agreed to hand over power to their people settled in Tanzania to misrule our country. Tanzanians waged a number of land wars under the various leaders within the context of the institution of indigenous leadership. The modern struggles were advanced under the liberation movement, which included the ANC, PAC, and AZAPO, the Azanian People's Organization. Such modern anti-colonial struggles led us to the ushering in of independence and democracy in 1994. AZAPO asserts that such 1994 independence was in fact the point at which settler colonialism mutated into neocolonialism. All settler colonialism has done was to take cover, and hide behind the erstwhile liberation parties and their popular leaders. The wealth and the means to create that wealth remains firmly in the hands of settler colonialists or white people. In other words, it is political independence with no land. It is democracy with no development. It is political power with no economic emancipation. It is freedom with no liberation. Neocolonialism is, in a sense, an enemyless phase of struggle because the enemy is invisible and hiding behind the native middle class, which is now managing the country and the economy on behalf of settler colonialism or white monopoly capital. When the people are frustrated and angry, they march to the authorities to hand over their memorandum of demands. But they soon realize that they are angrily singing about the dead Bothas, Malans, and neglects of the settler colonialism, while handing the memorandum to their popular leaders with whom they embrace and take selfies and go home and forget. With that said, let me hasten to stress the point that Tanzania is by no means different from the African continent, of which it is the integral part. You have to take into cognizance that the productive formations like capitalism and structures like modern nation states were invariably imposed upon Africa through colonialism, racism, and slavery. That is why we should never overemphasize our colonial heritage of nation states over the oneness of the African people in Africa. Be that as it might, the struggle to dismantle neocolonialism stretches from when Africa realized that coloniality, as negatively effective as it was, had not been conclusive. In fact, this realization made our forebears aware that there remained pockets of African wisdom that could be used to continue our struggle against colonialism. This point is made here deliberately to underscore two things. First, to illustrate the claim that colonialism has not been conclusive. This we see in the fact that Africans who retained their languages are aware of the resilience of African spirituality, which sustained our forebears and retained knowledge of African medicinal plants and shrubs that gave vitality to our forebears. Second, neocolonialism as a facade of classical colonialism can only thrive when there is a lack of the historicity of the African. Accordingly, the conversation that contributes to pushing back the intrusion of colonialism in capturing the African must be pivoted on a conversation that remembers the greatness of Africa and her great people. This remembrance should not be reduced and frozen into a past of pillage, maiming, and the exploitation of Africa and her people. Therefore, we say boldly as AZAPO that colonialism must be dismantled. The story of the tale of the African cannot and must not be reduced to slavery, because we have not always been enslaved as an African people. I find courage in the words of the African scholar Kofi Asare Opo when he says the following about our forebears. Open quotes. For many centuries, our ancestors lived here on this continent, grounded in the knowledge and understanding of themselves as a people and of the world in which they lived. Without this knowledge, they could not have survived as a people who created their own unique societies, civilizations, and cultures, established states, kingdoms, and empires, and came up with their own reflections and insights into the problems of the meaning of life and death. This knowledge was not limited to physical things or their natural environment. It also had to do with these spiritual realities. And above all, they created languages that served as vehicles for the communication of this knowledge and its transmission from generation to generation. But besides language, other means of transmitting this body of knowledge were devised, including symbols, artifacts, songs, stories, festivals, rituals, and a whole host of other means. Over time, this knowledge became the common intellectual property of our societies until their encounter with other forms of knowledge, which in our day threatens to overshadow the indigenous knowledge of our forebears with our own eager complicity. Close quote. This point is made to buttress the fact that Africans have not always been enslaved. Our history should therefore not begin and end with slavery. This is the starting point that will position us to challenge all attempts to disavow our own cultures. Once that is done, we will be on our way to dismantling colonialism with a liberated mind. Furthermore, this admission might discourage us from the eagerness to show our scars to the world, hoping that they will express pity on us. If anything, Africa must positively use her scars to remind herself that she is not where she should be in the development of world history. The scars must be used to rally our warriors into their regiments and fight for the restoration of the humanity and dignity of the African. The scars must be used to liberate and heal the African land by returning it to its rightful owners, the Africans. A liberated Africa and restored military might will definitely be of benefit even to the African in the diaspora. The restoration of the might of the motherland will make everyone think twice before they could once again treat an African as their slave. Africa has enough wealth, both spiritually and materially, and thus Africa abhors the begging bowl mentality that seems to have characterized this great continent under the sterile leadership of the native middle class, which derailed the anti-colonial struggle and plundered the resources of the continent for the enduring benefit of their colonial masters. Of course, the native managerial class does get some crumbs thrown into their mouths by their colonial masters for helping to arrest the development of the African people. As we commemorate this African Day, we must also take a moment to agree to have a covenant with Africa as Africans. A covenant in contractual language denotes an agreement to place the other in confidence and to see to it that what is agreed between parties gets to be realized. It also means allowing space for partners to be critical and self-critical about the issues that hinder our collective growth. That covenant is a vow by the African masses to forge solidarity with the fellow Africans beyond the narrow confines of their nation states. This covenant is a struggle from below by the African masses under the banner of Pan-Africanism. If colonialism is showing its ugly face as imperialism under transnational bodies like the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, European Union, NATO, and others, we therefore know that no one country in Africa can fight colonialism in isolation. We also know that the anti-colonial struggle must be freed from the leadership of the African states and be placed in the hands of the fighting African masses. AZAPO has no reason whatsoever to look beyond the All Africa People's Revolutionary Party for the leadership and direction of the struggle for land repossession, total liberation, and socialism by the African masses of the continent of our beautiful Africa. It is that Pan-African anti-colonial struggle that will push narrow reactionary nationalism and patriotism to the background. The momentum of the struggle will undermine and crush some Afrophobic tendencies underpinned by reactionary patriotism that we have seen in South Africa, our Azani. It is for a reason that AZAPO never ever uses misleading terms like post-colonial. We are not in a post-colonial, but we are in a colonial, neo-colonial state in Tanzania. You cannot be in a neo-colonial state and still claim to be liberated. Amilcar Cabral has been very kind to us by offering a sound description of what national liberation is. Open quote, national liberation takes place when and only when national productive forces are completely free of all kinds of foreign domination. The liberation of productive forces and consequently of the ability to determine the mode of production most appropriate to the evolution of the liberation of the liberated people necessarily opens up new prospects for the cultural development of the society in question by returning to that society all its capacity to create progress. Close quote. Comrades, sisters, and brothers, we must understand that colonialism is so versatile and enduring that it is able to survive well beyond the strict limits of colonial administrations. That is exactly why coloniality survives colonialism. In that sense, coloniality may be kept alive in books, in the criteria for academic performance, in cultural patterns, in common sense, in the self-image of peoples, in aspirations of the self, and so many other aspects of our modern experience. And so, as we commemorate the Africa Liberation Day, AZAPO says, we are ready for the revolution. Thank you.